Before I started my helicopter journey and began learning how helicopters actually fly, I thought it was pretty simple. The blades spin and the helicopter lifts off. But as I started ground school, I quickly realized there was a lot more happening behind the scenes. In the previous lesson, we covered the basic mechanics behind helicopter flight and some of the primary flight controls. Today, it's time to take it a step further and understand the why behind it all. To do that, we need to explore the aerodynamic principles that make flight possible and how they work together to generate lift. In this lesson, we'll cover key concepts such as Newton's third law of motion, Bernoulli's Principle, the Venturi Effect, Airfoil Design, and angle of attack. I've also put together some visual aids and examples that helped me understand these concepts, and hopefully they'll help you as well. So with that said, let's start with the most fundamental principle in all of flight, Newton's third law of motion. Newton's third law states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. At first, this might sound like something from a high school science class, but it's actually happening every time the helicopter leaves the ground. As the rotor blades spin, they push a large volume of air downward. That is the action. The reaction is the air pushing back upward on the rotor system with an equal force. That is one of the primary reasons a helicopter is able to generate lift. As we watch this demonstration, notice how the rotor system is continuously accelerating downward. The more effectively we push air down, the more lift we create. Now, Newton's third law explains part of the story, but it doesn't fully explain why the rotor blade is so effective at moving the air in the first place. For that, we need to talk about airflow and pressure. Bernoulli's principle tells us that as airflow speed increases, pressure decreases. When I was first learning this concept, I struggled with it because it felt a little bit backwards to me. You would think faster moving air would create more pressure, not less. The example that helped me understand it a little bit better, though, was traffic. Imagine city traffic. Cars are moving slowly, stopping frequently, and moving in different directions. Everything feels crowded and congested. Compare that to traffic moving smoothly down a highway. The cars are traveling much faster, but they're also moving in a more organized direction. Air behaves in a similar way. As airflow speeds up, it becomes more organized and exerts less pressure against the surface it is flowing across. When air flows around an airfoil, the shape of the airfoil causes the airflow over the upper surface to accelerate. As that airflow speeds up, the pressure above the airfoil decreases. Meanwhile, the pressure below the airfoil remains relatively higher. This pressure difference contributes to lift generation. As we watch the airflow move around this airfoil, notice how the airflow accelerates across the upper surface and how the pressure changes as a result. Now, if you're anything like me, you might be wondering how we can actually see this relationship between velocity and pressure. Fortunately, there is a simple phenomenon that demonstrates Bernoulli's principle in action, and it's called the Venturi Effect. The Venturi Effect really is just Bernoulli's principle in action. When airflow is forced through a narrower area, it speeds up. And according to Bernoulli's principle, when velocity increases, pressure decreases. Notice what happens in the narrow section of the tube. The airflow speeds up dramatically and the pressure drops. As the tube widens again, the airflow slows down and the pressure begins to recover. If you'd like to try a simple demonstration yourself, take two pieces of paper and hold them vertically side by side, with a few inches of space between them. Now blow hard between the two sheets of paper. Most people expect the papers to move away from each other. Instead, they'll move towards each other. Why? Because the airflow between the paper is moving faster than the air on the outside. According to Bernoulli's principle, The faster the airflow creates lower pressure between the sheets. The relatively higher pressure on the outside then pushes the papers inward towards each other. It's a simple demonstration, but it's a great way to visualize the relationship between airflow, velocity, and pressure. While the Venturi effect itself isn't the primary reason a helicopter blade generates lift, it helps us understand one of the key aerodynamic relationships involved in lift generation. Faster airflow generally means lower pressure. Now that we understand how airflow velocity affects pressure, let's look at the shape of the rotor blade itself and see how it takes advantage of these aerodynamic principles. Helicopter rotor blade is an airfoil. An airfoil is any shape designed to produce more lift than drag when moving through the air at a suitable angle. If we look closely at an airfoil, one of the most important reference lines is called the chord line. The chord line is an imaginary straight line connecting the leading edge and the trailing edge of the airfoil. As pilots, we use this line as a reference when discussing how the airfoil is positioned relative to the airflow. Notice the highlighted chord line running through the center of the airfoil. For now, don't worry too much about memorizing every part of the airfoil. The important thing to remember is that the shape of the airfoil helps create the conditions needed for lift generation. The airfoil accelerates airflow, influences pressure distribution, and effectively redirects air as it passes through the atmosphere. But the shape of the airfoil alone isn't enough to produce lift. We also need to consider how the airfoil is positioned relative to the airflow. That brings us up to one of the most important concepts in all of aerodynamics: angle of attack. Before we define angle of attack, let's look at a rotor blade. Notice what happens as the collective is increased. As the pilot raises the collective, the pitch of the rotor blade increases. As blade pitch increases, the chord line rotates upwards with the blade. This change in blade pitch changes how the airfoil meets with the airflow, and that change directly affects lift generation. Angle of attack is defined as the angle between the chord line and the relative wind. The chord line is the reference line we discussed on the previous slide. Relative wind is the airflow moving opposite the direction of the airfoil's travel. The angle formed between these two lines is called the angle of attack. As the angle of attack increases, the airfoil generally produces more lift. However, there is a limit. Every airfoil has a critical angle of attack. If the angle of attack becomes too great, airflow can no longer follow the upper surface smoothly. When that happens, lift decreases rapidly and the airfoil enters a stall. The important takeaway is that angle of attack is one of the many primary factors controlling lift generation. As helicopter pilots, one of our jobs is managing blade pitch and angle of attack to produce the lift we need while avoiding excessive angles that reduce aerodynamic efficiency. Let's recap what we learned today. Newton's third law explains how pushing air downward creates an equal and opposite upward reaction. Bernoulli's principle showed us how faster airflow results in lower pressure. The Venturi effect helped us visualize the relationship between airflow velocity and pressure. We learned that helicopter rotor blades are airfoils specifically designed to generate lift efficiently. And finally, we discussed angle of attack, one of the most important aerodynamic concepts a pilot can understand. While each of these concepts can be studied in much greater detail, together they form a foundation of helicopter aerodynamics and help explain how a helicopter is able to generate lift and fly. If you enjoyed this lesson or found it helpful, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and let me know which concept was easiest for you to understand, or which one still feels confusing. Also, if there are any helicopter topics you would like me to cover in future lessons, drop those in the comments as well. If you're following along with my helicopter journey, consider subscribing so you don't miss out on future lessons and flight training content. Thanks for watching, and as always, we're learning to fly, one step at a time. I'll see you in the next lesson.